Have you ever wanted D&D to feel like an action role-playing game? Something like Skyrim or Dark Souls? If so, you should check out the new tabletop role-playing game, Vagabond, that sets out to mimic this feeling with seamless transitions into combat, snappy turns with almost no math, and GMing so simple, it literally runs itself.
Hello and welcome to Tabletop Trends, where we take a look at the most fun and creative TTRPGs out there, ranging from the big names to the more obscure ones. We'll sit down with the designers, we'll ask them questions, crack some jokes, and play their games together. We're going to let you know how the game works and what makes it special, the things you might love and the things you might not love so much. By the end, you should have a general idea of how the game actually feels to play and whether or not it'll be a good fit for your table. Today, we were lucky enough to have a chance to sit down with the lead designer of Vagabond, Taryn Pounds, and play his game together.
Yeah, so hey everyone, I am Taryn, Indestructible Boy here on YouTube. Vagabond is supposed to feel like if I say the practicality in the OSR with a lot of the character expression of what you get out of like a 5e or a Pathfinder. A lot of the leveling and how you're going to get your perks is going to feel more Pathfindery. I wanted to keep that same character expression in there. I wanted fights to feel like fights and not like turn-based sort of Final Fantasy style. We get into a loading screen and then suddenly we're fighting and playing a different game. Vagabond is supposed to flow fairly seamlessly between when you all are doing dungeon crawl exploration and then a combat. I'm emphasizing the teamwork here. Enemy side, our side, right?
Mm.
So you guys are able to think a bit more about like when you want to do maybe this spell on that guy's sword. So supports are going to feel more instant payoff. I think those like brawlers that are meant to be the big frontliners are going to feel that instant like, oh yeah, buddy, thank you so much for that. Like, oh, right. I've talked about it as an action game before. It's going to feel like less of a RPG and a bit more in that kind of Skyrim and Dark Souls kind of way, which sounds weird to say less of an RPG and then list two of the most famous RPGs in the last 20 years, but also kind of trying to reduce the math, reduce a lot of the mental load that comes with running or playing these kinds of games, and just make things to where it's just like, I want the system to tell you, yes, you get this thing, and you're not restricted to do that, more than it's telling you, okay, you get this cool thing, but so a lot of Vagabond is geared more towards yes and, not yes, but.
So Taryn talks about character expression and the yes and design philosophy of Vagabond. But how does that actually shape up in the game? Well, to begin with, classes are really lightweight, and some of the core features of every class are able to be picked up by any other class as well, through the form of what they call perks.
So what perks are they are very light load, kind of mechanical like uplifts that you'll see. Um, Perks are there's not multi-classing in Vagabond by default, and I wanted to make sure that people were still able to do the kind of build that they wanted to do really early on. In some ways, some of them are like I want to keep refining myself down this same path, and in other ways, I want to open up my playstyle a bit more.
For example, let's take a look at this one class here, the Vanguard. This is kind of like the protector class of Vagabond. And by the way, I love the quote. The first feature here, though, is that you gain the Protector perk. What the Protector perk does is it lets you block an attack that would have hit your ally. And this is not unique to the Vanguard. Anybody who qualifies for that can actually pick that up later and become somewhat of a Vanguard themselves. Now, the Vanguard will always be best at that, but you can kind of pick up from other classes and form your own thing the way that you want to. So classes are kind of a collection of skill and weapon training, as well as a couple of boosts that solidify their core concept, but they don't determine your HP or your saves, and a lot of the things that make them tick can actually be picked up by other classes too. Normally, luminaries, which are kind of healers here, can't use melee weapons at all. But if you really wanted to, you could pick up a perk that lets you do that. And then they start acting like the Revelator class, which is kind of like the Paladin. So the classes can start resembling each other really quickly, and the lines can blur. But the other big yes and in the system is magic.
I never liked that thought about the way that spells were designed for D&D, where it was like charm person, but it only works for this thing over here. That I want to say that if like an improv game is supposed to be a yes and, we need to start cutting out these yes buts wherever we can. And Vancian Magic is a magnificently huge yes but. Now, the trade-off is I really did want the feeling of I am making magic. I am like whenever I make a spell, I am like crafting it. And that felt super cool to me. Wall of Fire does one thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
It's a good thing, but like in Vagabond, the same spell that you use to do Fireball or Firebolt or Scorching Ray also does Wall of Fire. You know, so I wanted to have that like this one spell does so much for you. Because what that also means is we reduce the amount of spells you have to know. Right? So like if I give you one spell that can do this many things, then I don't have to give you 20 spells that do one thing in particular.
So there aren't as many spells in Vagabond. There are still quite a few, but you can mix and match those spells with different deliveries. For example, the burn spell can be a single target spell and you just shoot fire at them at a distance, kind of like a firebolt from D&D. Or you could make it an area of effect and have it a fireball. Or you could have a wall and have it as a wall of fire. Or a cone, like Burning Hands. Or you could even imbue it onto your sword, like a flaming sword. Every spell can be changed to unfold in different ways every time you cast it. And it really makes it feel like you're wielding and controlling this magic in a way that a lot of other systems just don't bring out. It makes magic feel flexible and fun instead of just memorizing one spell that only does X thing. So you can create some pretty normal sounding things, like an aura that heals people around you, or a wall of entangling vines, or a sphere of silence. But you can also create very unorthodox things, like a wall of confusion, or a sword that polymorphs people when you hit them, or an aura that unlocks all doors as you move around. But whatever your delivery system or your spell, you can always focus on it to keep it going for as long as you want, or as long as you have mana to do it.
It is currently sickened. So you're focusing on this, which means
I'll
at the
focus.
starting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the next turn it would be a mana, right?
Okay, this magic system is the coolest thing about Vagabond, in my opinion. And once I read the rules, I knew I had to try it. And after playing it, it didn't disappoint. It felt so cool to be shaping and shifting that magic in the way that you imagine doing it. Now, the magic and the perk system really open up character build and play, but the play isn't exactly crunchy or tactical. You don't really need to be that conscious of your character's positioning. In fact, they even use zones like near, close, and far.
I still think that there's a lot of crunch and character building in here for like I want to make the character I want to make, but in terms of the math behind it, no, we're not doing that. Like I want the actions to be graceful. I want people to feel like they're not really missing out on much. They just don't have to think about too much. I'm like this game is about reducing mental load, but not feeling like it's a game for 6-year-olds, you know.
So how exactly does it reduce mental load during play? Well, there's two big things at play. The first is that you remove as much math as possible from play. And the second is that you make your actions independent of the GM. In Vagabond, to succeed on a check, whether it's a skill or an attack, you need to roll above a certain number that is written in your character sheet. So you roll a d20, look at that number, is it higher than the number on your sheet for your target? If it is, you succeed.
In terms of the stats, the way that those work out, so they actually range from 2 to 7. There's no modifiers. Your stat is what factors into everything else. So the way that checks are calculated is it's 20 minus your stat, or like minus the related stat. And then if you're trained with the skill, it doubles your stat for determining the difficulty. So it would be like if you have a 6 in that, it's 20 minus 12 to get 8, right?
Yeah.
So when you build your character, you do that math one time and you never do it again. And all you do is roll a d20, see if it's higher than that number.
23? That feels pretty good.
And your difficulty is, I mean, I know it hits, but yeah.
Yeah, my difficulty for range is 14.
Okay.
Tabletop players aren't known to be the best at mental math anyway, so maybe this helps. But it definitely will help that you don't need to check with your GM whether you have succeeded or not. You just No. This makes turns really quick and easy with no back and forth with the GM. Combine that with enemies that have pre-established attack patterns and morale rolls to see whether they retreat or not, the game actually starts to run itself. And that makes solo play really well supported in Vagabond. Although, Taryn says that wasn't the original design intention.
In all honesty, like to me, the thought was the ideal system for game masters would know how to run itself. And I started off from day one, not necessarily thinking I need solo play to make the player have more fun. It was I want solo play to make the game easier to run. It not only does it help more GMs in figuring out here's what this stat block does, but it also helps out for like solo play because they're like, oh, I
Yeah.
know exactly what this enemy does with its action and move.
Right.
So
In combination with that, enemies don't make any checks at all.
for me, my ethos was I never felt like it was interesting whether or not the villain failed a check, and that's what saved the day. In any story that we see of heroes, they have to stop this villain, or else the villain's going to get away with what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
So to me, the interesting thing was always that no, it's on the heroes to prove that what they want to do actually works, because otherwise the villains are going to succeed. If they want to stab you, they're going to stab you. It's on you to dodge or parry that, you know. So like monsters don't make checks. That's another thing that makes GMing for the system way more fun. I get to just run the world, and like that's okay, sick.
So when you get attacked, you can try to dodge or block it, and that will reduce the incoming damage a little bit.
You're gonna either choose to make a reflex or an endure save.
At 13, my target is 8, so
It reduced like the highest roll damage die, but this is a mean
Ooh.
hit. So as it like washes over you, you take 9 damage.
Also, if you have an effect on an enemy, they are always going to escape that unless you prevent them from doing that. So you, as the player, are making that check to keep that enemy restrained or slowed or stunned or whatever. They're not rolling to escape. You are rolling to keep them there.
This thing is currently trying to break the restraints. I'm gonna need you to make me a cast check to keep it restrained.
Sure. 15.
There you go. It like starts snapping some of these vines, and then you just like get your focus in, and it keeps it down, pinned down.
Now, this might sound like there's not a big difference from the enemy rolling to try to escape, but during play, I found it fun and exciting, and it felt like things were on my shoulders to make sure things happened, instead of just hoping that the monsters have bad luck. And to top it all off, initiative doesn't exist. You just enter combat and start swinging. There's no loading screen. So it's excellent for dungeon delving, where you're entering and leaving combat really quickly, going through a bunch of rooms. It makes things feel seamless and integrated, but also action-packed and snappy.
And one of the things I hate the most about playing any TTRPG is I take my turn, it takes me about 30 seconds, and then I'm sitting there for 20 minutes. Our players should feel like they're always doing stuff. And I didn't want that doing something to feel like I'm waiting for the perfect time to use my reaction. That's never fun to me either. That's anxiety, it almost feels like. If you know what the monsters are doing, it's real quick to just negotiate all that stuff. That's why I was like, you got to be on this side to feel kind of the full extent of this system. Yeah, we're usually getting through, as we've been timing it, about like 20 room dungeons in 3 hours.
Okay.
So
Wow. That's quick.
So putting all those things together, it really does feel like Vagabond has captured the essence of those action role-playing games. If you really want to dig down into the nitty-gritties, you can create this amazing build for your character, but then in play, you're just cutting through enemies left and right. Now, as is tradition, we asked Taryn what he would rate Vagabond on a crunchiness scale from 1 to 10 if Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition were in the middle at 5.
So, like, to me, I guess if we're going to put 5 out of 5, I kind of look at a game like maybe Cairn or Into the Odd, maybe like, you know, Mouse Ritter is Into the Odd, but those are like probably my ones. Very, very light load. I think Nabe is probably like a 2. I'd probably even put like maybe Merkborg is also right around that 2 or 3 range. I think I'm probably right there at a 3 I guess like Worlds Without Number would be like another step up from there, and then I would put like the 5e, and then you would probably get into like Pathfinder, and then yeah.
Okay. Okay, so those are the rules of Vagabond. Now that we've done that overview, why don't we chat a little bit about the things that we liked and didn't like so much about the system? So, Jeremy, what did you think so far?
Honestly, I think my first impression was just that the game was honestly a lot better than I thought it was going to be going into it. And we had spent a lot of time going over the rules and reading it and trying to kind of understand it and make sense of it all. It was very different than the types of games that we typically play and the other games that we've reviewed on this channel before. Um, but it really exceeded my expectations in a lot of ways. There was a really solid amount of fluidity to it. The way that you just kind of like jumped and like snapped into combat felt really, really great. There was none of this pausing to roll initiative and figure out who's going when and what's going to happen. You were just sort of exploring and then you were in combat. And that felt really, really cool. And that type of thing kind of played out throughout the game. It wasn't just exclusive to that moment when we were going into combat.
For me, I think my absolute favorite thing about the system was spells. It really felt like you were actually like crafting the spell, because every time you did it, you could do it in a different way. You know, you could choose when you're going to do damage with it, when you're going to do the effect. So it felt like, okay, like, I just know fire and I can just like wield fire as I want, you know, like, and so it felt like that freedom of magic that doesn't quite exist in D&D, because those spells are so rote and so confined to one specific thing.
And it's funny because for me, I consider that both a pro and a con to the game. It felt a little bit overwhelming to me. Like the more I read and the more I spent time with it, you're obviously able to understand it. It's not completely incomprehensible, but it definitely is something where if you're coming from a system like 5e, kind of like you mentioned, where the spells are just so rigid and so rote. This is what they do. They don't do anything else. Don't even consider it. This is the complete antithesis of that, and that can be the most fantastic element of the game for you if that's the type of experience that you're looking for. But it can also be a little bit intimidating if you're looking if you kind of enjoy more of that the simpler aspect of spellcasting.
I want to say like the layout, fantastic. And as I was reading through it, it felt like it read so smoothly. It was like easy to consume. But then like there were just some things I felt like just needed examples. I spent quite a long time asking Taryn like, how does this spell, like imbuing the spell into a weapon, work? How do I focus on that? Like when do I like spend mana, and how does it keep up, and do I need to spend mana every turn even if I don't boost it, and just like goes on and on, and like there are some things like that just aren't explained. Maybe I'm just like really obtuse and I just need things spelled out.
The actual text, the layout of the book is beautiful. The art is incredible. The layout is phenomenal. Of all the books we've read through, and honestly, including 5e content, I don't think we've come across anything that reads as simply and cleanly as Vagabond did. But I fully also am in complete agreement with you that there was so much that I just didn't understand at the same time, which is such a it's almost like conflicting statements where like it read perfectly, but then I didn't really grasp a lot of what what he was trying to say, what they were trying to get at. And I know he kind of mentioned during the call, and maybe this is something that it's just a lack of familiarity on our end. It's perhaps something that OSR style players are more accustomed to, this type of rule set where they leaves a lot more kind of up to the adjudication of the players or the game master. But on my end, I know I asked you, and I think I asked Tara like 5 times. Just I couldn't figure out the simple thing of just how to make an attack. And there was even one other part while I was reading through it. In the preamble, it explains that monsters always hit. At no other point in the text does it mention that the enemies will always hit you. The only place that it mentioned it is in the preamble to the rest of the book, which is a section that I guarantee 90% of players are not even going to read. They're going to skip over that. I happened to catch it because I was just reading every page, and I was like, huh? And that really caught me off guard.
In terms of the game, it's not complex. I mean, like Imbue is, but almost all the game is not complex. You can grasp it quite easily if it's just explained to you in a second.
One of the other things I really enjoyed about the game throughout our play was that I noticed that there were good opportunities for teamwork. You were able to generate, favor for me pretty consistently, which is something that my classes being a rogue really, really heavily relied on. It ended up playing out really well. I always really enjoy the fact that we're not just playing like a single player game with two people in it. And that there actually are ways for us to interact with each other, for me to make you better, you to make me better, and all those kinds of things.
I'm not certain how I feel about the set DCs. If you roll an 8 or higher, you hit, and it doesn't really matter what enemy you're trying to target. It's just like that's the person you're hitting. Or you're trying to intimidate somebody, and it feels like some people will be more difficult to intimidate than others. But like if you roll higher than this target, you intimidate them all. I'm not 100% sold on it, but I think like the ease of play might be worth it. Like it makes it so easy to just immediately know. You can roll the dice and you know if you hit or not, and then you can just roll the damage. Like there's other stuff that kind of like pulls into that where it's like you don't need the DM to do anything. And so like, instead of like them making saves, you're the one trying to like keep them locked down or whatever, right?
Yeah.
They will escape unless you can reassert that control. And I really like that idea because it feels lame where it's just like, oh, they dodged it, oh, they dodged, where it's like, no, like you forced them in and you didn't succeed in keeping them in and they broke out because you failed, not they were just too strong. So I like that idea.
As simple and straightforward as that is, and that's kind of the big pro, is that it is incredibly simple and incredibly straightforward. And like you said, you don't even need the DM to do anything. You can kind of just do that yourself, and that's part of what helps combat flow. For me, that kind of got a little bit boring in a sense where there was no variability. But again, totally on the flip side of that, like you said as well, I loved, even though I wasn't casting the spells, I loved that you were the one like in control of maintaining the spell effect and keeping it going. It had nothing to do with your game master rolling a dice and making a save or anything like that. It gives the spellcaster a little bit more control, and that is kind of fun. In all honesty, I had a lot of fun. I really genuinely enjoy the typical martial style of play. It's the type of character that I tend to lean towards regardless of the game that I'm playing. So I kind of knew what I was getting into, and knowing that you were going the spellcaster route and seeing how kind of complex spellcasting was, it was even more of an intentional choice for me to pick the rogue, which is the character that seemed like it was the complete absolute polar opposite of the spectrum from what you picked. And I wanted to kind of see how that worked in play. And it was fun. I had a great time. I do, to some capacity, it almost feels like we're playing different games, though, if that kind of
Mm.
makes sense. Like
Yeah.
there was so many different things that you could do with your spells, and it felt like I was just going bonk every single turn, which is fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with that at all. I had a great time doing it. It did feel like there was a little bit less depth on the martial side of things. Maybe with martials, that's where you can really kind of get into it with some of the perks if you really choose different ones that can kind of augment your character, augment your play style. But just kind of picking a generic rogue and going with it felt, I don't want to say like one dimensional, but it felt a bit simplistic, I guess is a better way to put it. So we talked about quite a few different things. I'm just curious, is there anything else that really kind of stood out to you? Anything else that you really liked about Vagabond?
Yeah, I actually really liked the critical hit system, especially with saving throws. If you roll a crit on a saving throw, you get an extra action, and it feels
Yeah.
like like it's worthwhile. It's exciting to roll a crit on a saving throw, whereas it's like it doesn't really happen on in D&D. Like it's if you roll a 16 or above, it's all the same. So I thought that was pretty cool.
It's cool. And even like, in 5e, you crit on the saving throw, you get absolutely nothing. And even you crit on an attack roll, and it's like, okay, maybe you do a little bit more depending on, hopefully you don't roll badly on your damage.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the fact that they introduce some extra element, and like you said, it feels exciting. Getting an extra action feels powerful.
Okay, now we've gone over the likes and things we didn't like as much about it. But who overall do you think would enjoy this game?
I think the perfect person for this game is someone who's really looking to take that kind of action role-playing game experience, someone who might enjoy a game like Skyrim or Diablo, and really bring that to the tabletop. I feel like the game really translates well to that type of play, where you might spend a significant amount of time really crafting and devising the perfect character that you want to play with, picking and choosing your different build and getting everything just right. But then the moment-to-moment combat and decision making feels really, really simple and fluid and straightforward, and it all just kind of works seamlessly. And then on the side, if you're someone that really enjoys some in-depth and really like granular focus on spell casting, this is going to be the perfect game for you.
I 100% agree. Like, I think that Taran achieved his vision. He wanted it to feel like
Yeah,
an action role playing game, and it literally does in that
100%.
regard. Um, and and yes, I agree. If you want spellcasting, if you want to like come in and you like watch anime or like some superhero movie and like you see them using magic in some ways you like D&D would never do this. But in Vagabond, a lot of the time you can. It's just so flexible and open, and the way that you deliver your magic. Yeah, so I think those two types of people will really enjoy this game.
So after dipping our toes into this flexible, snappy game, it really makes me wonder what else is out there waiting to be played. Find
Find
out
out with
with
us
us
next
next time
time
on
on
Tabletop
Tabletop
Trends.
Trends.